My name is Olivia Holbrook. I'm 44 years old, and I own a plumbing company in Springfield, Missouri. Holbrook Plumbing Services started with an old Ford van that barely survived the highway and a father who believed hard work could fix almost anything, including a broken life. My dad, Vernon Holbrook, bought that van from a mechanic who swore it ran like a dream. It didn't. The transmission slipped every other mile, and the passenger door only opened if you kicked it from the inside. But that van carried the two of us across half the neighborhoods in Springfield for nearly 20 years. Dad handled the big installations back then. I carried tools, crawled through crawl spaces, and learned how to fix pipes before I was old enough to legally drink. When he finally retired, I took over the company. Now we have 6 trucks, 8 employees, and contracts with half the new subdivisions on the west side of town. Most days, I'm still the one holding the wrench. And for 16 years, Daniel Carter handled everything else. Daniel took care of the books, invoices, vendor payments, payroll. He had a marketing background and an easy smile that made customers trust him within 5 minutes of meeting him. I used to joke that I married the brains of the business. He'd laugh and say, "Someone has to make sure you don't spend all the company money on new pipe cutters." For a long time it worked. Perfectly. Or at least that's what I believed. That Tuesday started like any other. October in Missouri can be unpredictable, but that day had the kind of crisp air that reminds you why people stay here instead of moving to bigger cities. I was finishing a water heater installation in a house at the Riverside development, the kind of new neighborhood where every house looks like the one next to it, except for the color of the shutters. I wiped my hands on a rag and loaded my tools back into truck 3 when my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Working late tonight? Client dinner. Don't wait up." Nothing unusual. Daniel worked at Morrison Marketing, a downtown agency that handled advertising campaigns for local businesses. They had recently picked up a new retail account that kept him busy most evenings. I texted back a quick thumbs up and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. But something about the message sat wrong in my stomach, like a pipe joint that looked tight but still leaked when the pressure hit it. Daniel had been different lately, not in ways you could easily explain, just small things. He jumped every time his phone rang. He started taking calls outside. Sometimes he smiled at messages and then quickly locked his screen when I walked into the room. Little things, individually harmless, together unsettling. By the time I finished paperwork and drove across town, it was close to 7. The thought came out of nowhere. Maybe I should bring him dinner. Daniel loved the little Italian place near downtown, the one with the red checkered tablecloths and garlic bread that made your entire truck smell like heaven for 3 days. I ordered his favorite, chicken parmesan, extra breadsticks. As I carried the takeout bag back to the truck, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Maybe we'd eat together in his office. Laugh about the long day. Remember what we used to be before work schedules and responsibilities swallowed everything. Morrison Marketing sits inside an old warehouse that someone converted into a modern office space. Glass walls, exposed brick, steel beams across the ceiling. The kind of place that makes plumbers feel slightly out of place walking through the door in work boots. I parked across the street. The takeout bag rested on the passenger seat, and that's when I saw his car. Daniel's gray Honda, parked in the lot beside the building. Next to it sat a black BMW I didn't recognize. It was sleek, expensive, the kind of car that looks like it belongs to someone who enjoys watching other people struggle. I stared at it longer than necessary. Then I grabbed the food and crossed the street. The front doors were locked. The office had already closed for the day, but through the wide glass walls, the lights in the conference room were still on. I stepped closer and froze. Inside the conference room, I saw Daniel's silhouette. He wasn't alone. A woman stood across from him. Tall, dark hair, dressed in a fitted black blazer. At first, I thought they were just talking, but then he stepped closer. Too close. Close enough that their shoulders touched. I watched him reach up and tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. A gesture so familiar it made my chest tighten. He used to do that to me. All the time. The woman laughed. A soft laugh. Daniel leaned closer, and then they kissed. Not a quick mistake. Not the awkward kind of kiss that happens when someone misreads a moment. This kiss was slow, comfortable, practiced, like it had happened many times before. My hands started shaking. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I don't remember pulling my phone out. But suddenly it was in my hand. The camera pointed toward the glass wall. I took the photo. The screen captured everything. Daniel, the woman, his hands around her waist. Both of them smiling. Smiling like the world made perfect sense. Like the life I thought we had didn't exist. I stood there another 10 seconds. Maybe longer. Long enough to feel something inside me break quietly. Then I turned around and walked back to the truck. The takeout bag still sat on the passenger seat. The garlic bread smell filled the cab. I didn't remember putting the key in the ignition. I just drove. 10 minutes later, I pulled into a motel on Highway 65, one of those places people use when they don't want questions asked. I paid cash for a room. Inside, the carpet smelled faintly of bleach. The bedspread was an ugly shade of brown. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the photo on my phone. Daniel's arm around another woman. His face relaxed. Happy, like the man I thought I knew had never existed. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another text. From Daniel. Just finished. Heading home now. Love you. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned the phone face down on the nightstand. For the first time in 16 years, I didn't answer him, because something deep in my chest had already accepted the truth. The man I built my life with had just become a stranger, and I had no idea yet how much worse the truth was going to get. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the same image returned. Daniel standing behind that glass wall, his hand resting easily on another woman's waist. The way he leaned into her like it was the most natural thing in the world. At around 3 a.m, I gave up pretending sleep might come. I sat up in the motel bed, opened the photo again, and studied it like a blueprint. 16 years together teaches you things about a person. The angle of Daniel's shoulders. The relaxed way he tilted his head when he was comfortable. The look in his eyes when he believed he wasn't being watched. He wasn't surprised in that photo. He wasn't conflicted. He looked practiced, which meant one thing. This wasn't new. Just before dawn, I checked out of the motel and drove home. The house was quiet when I let myself in. Daniel's shoes were by the door. His briefcase sat beside the entry table. I showered, changed clothes, and lay down for less than an hour without sleeping. By the time morning light fully reached the bedroom windows, Daniel was already in the shower. The house smelled like his cologne. He hummed quietly behind the bathroom door, like nothing in the world had changed. Like the last 16 years were still intact. Instead of speaking to him, I left the room and drove across town to the one person whose advice had guided me through almost every major decision in my life. My father. Sunset Manor is a quiet apartment complex for retirees. Nothing fancy. Just a brick building surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges and a small pond where older men like to sit with fishing poles that never catch anything. My dad, Vernon Holbrook, opened the door before I even knocked. 71 years old. Still standing straight. Still sharp-eyed. The doctor said his memory sometimes slipped, but most days he was the same man who had taught me how to solder copper pipes before I was tall enough to reach the workbench. He took one look at my face and said, "You look like someone just ran over your dog." I stepped inside. "I need advice." He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking questions. We sat at the small kitchen table. For a minute, I just stared at the steam rising from the mug. Then I slid my phone across the table. Dad picked it up, looked at the picture. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't react the way most people would. No anger, no dramatic speech, just quiet understanding. He set the phone down. "You confront him yet?" "No." "Good." That surprised me. "You think I should?" Dad leaned back in the chair and folded his arms. "When you're cutting pipe," he said slowly, "what's the first rule I ever taught you?" I sighed. "Measure twice, cut once." "Exactly." He tapped the phone with one finger. "One photo tells you something's wrong, but it doesn't tell you the whole story." His eyes met mine. "Once you know everything, Olivia, you can't unknow it." The room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then he added, "If you're going to cut someone out of your life, you better make sure the measurement's right." I left his apartment with the photo still burning in my mind. But now I had something else too. A plan. That afternoon I drove back downtown. Morrison Marketing looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Clean glass. Exposed brick. Successful people pretending their lives were perfectly organized. Daniel's Honda was already in the lot. And next to it, the same black BMW. I parked across the street and waited. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Employees left the building one by one. Finally, around 5:30, the front doors opened again. A woman stepped out. Tall. Dark hair. The same woman from the conference room. She walked straight to the BMW. I lowered my seat slightly so she wouldn't see me. As she pulled out of the lot, I grabbed a pen and wrote down the license plate number on a scrap of receipt paper. Then I started the truck and followed her. Springfield traffic isn't exactly complicated. 10 minutes later, the BMW turned into a gated apartment complex on the south side of town. The kind of place where rent costs more than most mortgages. I slowed as she pulled through the entrance, just long enough to see the building number she parked beside. Then I kept driving. My hands were steady now, cold, focused, like the moment right before cutting into a wall when you know there's a leak behind it. The next morning, Daniel was already in the shower when I woke up. I walked into the bedroom. His wallet sat on the dresser. Next to it was his leather briefcase. I stood there for a moment. 16 years. 16 years of trust. And now I was about to do something I had never done once in all that time. I opened the briefcase. Inside were folders, receipts, and a slim black notebook where Daniel tracked marketing expenses. At first, nothing looked unusual. Restaurant receipts, gas stations, office supply purchases. But then I noticed something strange. Several of the receipts came from places across town, restaurants Daniel had never mentioned. And one credit card statement made my stomach twist. The card wasn't in Daniel's name. It was issued to Holbrook Plumbing Services, our company account. An hour later, I sat inside First National Bank, across from our longtime account manager, Helen Rodriguez. Helen had known our family business for more than a decade. She trusted me enough not to ask too many questions when I requested to see the company's detailed statements. She printed them quietly, stack after stack of paper sliding across the desk. "Everything okay with the business?" she asked carefully. "Just double-checking some expenses." I carried the paperwork out to my truck and spread the pages across the dashboard. At first it looked normal. Vendor payments, equipment purchases, utility bills. Then I noticed a pattern. Small transfers, always under $2,000. Always labeled as marketing expenses. Companies I'd never heard of. Kellerman Consulting, Premium Solutions LLC, Strategic Marketing Group. My chest tightened as I added the numbers on my phone calculator. One payment, another. 6 months of transfers. When I finished, the total flashed on the screen. $23,000. $23,000 I could trace immediately. Gone. That night I called my son, Mateo Holbrook, 22 years old, studying business at Missouri State. He inherited Daniel's sharp mind for numbers, and unfortunately, my stubbornness. We met at a diner near campus, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that never seems to run out. I slid the bank statements across the booth. Mateo opened his laptop. For nearly an hour, he studied the numbers, typing, cross-checking, running searches. Finally, he leaned back slowly. His face had gone pale. "Mom!" "What?" He turned the screen toward me. "I called 2 of these companies. And? They don't exist." My stomach dropped. "And the third one?" Mateo swallowed. "They've never done business with us." He looked me directly in the eyes. "This isn't accounting mistakes." His voice lowered. "This is embezzlement." The word hung between us like a storm cloud. I stared at the paperwork. 16 years of partnership. And suddenly the life I believed in looked like a carefully hidden crime. Mateo closed the laptop slowly. Then he asked the question I already knew was coming. "Mom!" "Yeah? Are you ready for what happens next?" I thought about the photo, Daniel's smile behind the glass, and something inside me hardened. I've been ready since the moment I saw that picture, because the truth was finally beginning to surface, and it was a lot darker than I had imagined. After the diner closed and the waitress wiped down our table for the 3rd time, Mateo packed up his laptop and looked at me carefully. "You need a lawyer," he said. "Not maybe, not eventually. Just a quiet, certain statement." "You're sure about that?" I asked. Mateo slid the bank statements back into a folder and pushed them toward me. "Mom, $23,000 didn't disappear by accident." His voice was calm, analytical, the way he always sounded when he was solving a complicated problem. "This is deliberate." Outside the diner window, the parking lot lights buzzed softly in the cold air. I stared at the stack of papers in front of me. 6 months of transactions. 6 months of lies. Mateo hesitated for a moment before asking the question he'd been holding back. "Do you think he's the one moving the money?" The image of Daniel kissing that woman behind the glass flashed through my mind again. "Yes," I said quietly. Mateo nodded once. Then he said the words that changed the direction of everything. Then we stopped guessing. The next morning, I walked into the office of Patricia Wells, the most feared divorce attorney in Springfield. Her office sat on the 4th floor of a modern building overlooking the courthouse. Inside, everything looked expensive and organized. Dark wood furniture, framed legal degrees, floor-to-ceiling windows. Patricia herself was exactly what her reputation suggested. Sharp, direct, the kind of woman who didn't waste words. She listened while I explained everything. The photo, the bank transfers, the suspicious companies. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. $23,000 in 6 months, she said slowly. I nodded. That's what we can prove so far. Patricia's eyes hardened. This isn't just adultery. She tapped the stack of statements. This is felony theft. The word landed heavier than I expected. Felony. The man I had lived with for 16 years was no longer just a cheating partner. He was potentially a criminal. Patricia stood and walked toward the window. "You have 2 options," she said. "Confront him now and hope he tells the truth." She turned back toward me. "Or gather enough evidence that he can't lie anymore." I already knew which one my father would recommend. "Evidence," I said. Patricia nodded. That's what I thought. She walked back to her desk and picked up the phone. I know someone who can help. An hour later, I was sitting across from Tom Davidson, a private investigator with a calm voice and the kind of posture that suggested he had once carried a badge. Which, as it turned out, he had. 20 years as a Springfield detective before opening his own investigative firm. Tom studied the photo on my phone carefully. Then he asked one question. You know the man's name? I shook my head. No. Tom nodded slowly. That's okay. He pointed at the BMW visible in the background of the photo. You got the license plate? I slid the receipt paper across the table. Tom smiled slightly. That's a good start. 2 days later, Tom called. Olivia, he said, I've got something. I drove to his office immediately. Tom laid a thin file folder on the desk. Inside was a printed photograph of the man who owned the BMW. Tall, sharp suit, confident smile. His name is Shane Kellerman, Tom said. The name sounded expensive, like someone who sold luxury real estate or ran a hedge fund. But Tom's expression told a different story. You've heard of him? I asked. Tom leaned back in his chair. Unfortunately, yes. He opened the folder and slid several additional photos across the desk. Different women, different cities, different restaurants and hotels, but always the same man, Shane Kellerman. He has a pattern, Tom explained. What kind of pattern? He targets people with access to money. My stomach tightened. Business owners, executives, anyone who can move funds without immediate oversight. Tom tapped one of the photos. He convinces them to invest in his consulting projects. Then another. He promises huge returns and pressures them to keep the money flowing. Then another. And when the money dries up, Tom didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I already understood. He disappears, I said quietly. Tom nodded. And moves on to the next target. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a performance. Every morning, I woke up beside Daniel and pretended nothing had changed. I made coffee, asked about his meetings, complimented his new haircut. Sometimes I even reached across the breakfast table and squeezed his hand. Every lie tasted like metal in my mouth. But Tom and Patricia had both told me the same thing. Act normal. So I did. At night, I documented everything. Every suspicious phone call. Every unexplained expense. Every late evening meeting. Tom followed Daniel whenever possible. Slowly, the evidence grew. Photos of Daniel meeting Shane at restaurants. Records of bank transfers moving from our company account into accounts connected to Kellerman Consulting. One evening, while I was washing dishes, Lily walked into the kitchen holding her stuffed rabbit. Our 6-year-old daughter looked up at me with the kind of innocent seriousness only children have. Mom? Yes, sweetheart? She hesitated. Then she asked quietly, Why don't you and Daddy laugh together anymore? The question hit harder than any of the bank statements. I forced a smile. We're just busy right now. Lily nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Children notice more than adults like to believe. That night after she fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the ceiling. The house felt like a stage set. Every object suddenly fake. Every memory slightly distorted. 2 weeks later, Tom called again. Olivia, he said, I think we've got everything. I met him at Patricia's office. Tom placed a thick manila envelope on the table. Inside were photographs. Lots of them. Daniel and Shane at a downtown bar. Daniel meeting Shane near a hotel. Daniel transferring money from our business account. Tom also included printed financial records. One page showed something that made my chest tighten. A joint investment account in Kansas City. Daniel Carter listed as an authorized user. The account itself belonged to a company connected to Shane Kellerman. Balance, $40,000. Nearly 2 years of our company's profits slowly redirected. Patricia reviewed the document silently. When she finished, she closed the folder. Then she looked directly at me. Her voice was calm, clinical. We can destroy him. The words echoed in the quiet room. I stared down at the evidence. 16 years of marriage. A child. A business we built from nothing. And now it was all sitting in a manila envelope. Patricia leaned forward slightly. The real question, she said, is how much of your life you're willing to let him take. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Because somewhere upstairs in our house, Lily was probably asleep with her stuffed rabbit. And whatever decision I made next would change her world forever. For 2 days after Tom delivered the evidence, I didn't confront Daniel. I carried the envelope everywhere instead. In my truck, in my work bag. Sometimes I even placed it on the kitchen counter while making coffee, just to remind myself the truth was real. Not a nightmare, not a misunderstanding. Evidence. Patricia had already explained the legal strategy. If he cooperates, she said, we keep this civil. She tapped the folder. If he fights you, this becomes a criminal case. Felony theft, fraud, possibly prison. But none of that mattered to me as much as one thing. Lily, our daughter deserves stability. She deserved a future that wasn't destroyed by courtrooms and headlines. So Patricia proposed a deal. Daniel gives up his claim to the company, pays restitution, accepts supervised visitation, and in exchange, we don't press criminal charges. Most people in Daniel's position take the deal because the alternative is far worse. The confrontation happened on a Friday night. Lily was sleeping over at her friend Ava's house. The house felt strangely quiet without her. I set 2 glasses of water on the kitchen table. The manila envelope sat between them. Daniel came home just after 10. He walked through the door carrying his laptop bag and loosened his tie like every other work night. "Hey," he said casually. "Sorry I'm late." I kept my voice calm. "How was work?" "Busy. Henderson account is driving everyone crazy." He walked toward the kitchen. Then he stopped. His eyes landed on the envelope. Something in his expression shifted immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Sit down, Daniel." He hesitated for half a second before pulling out a chair. "What's going on?" I took a sip of water before speaking, just to steady my voice. Then I said 2 words. "Shane Kellerman." The color drained from his face. It was immediate, instant. The kind of reaction that only happens when someone hears a name they desperately hoped you would never know. "Where did you hear that?" he asked quietly. I slid the first photo across the table. Daniel and Shane walking into a hotel lobby. Then another. The restaurant. The bar. The bank transfer records. Finally, the investment account statement. $40,000. Daniel stared at the evidence. His fingers began to tremble. For several seconds, he didn't speak. Then his briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the floor. "Olivia, Don't lie." The words came out colder than I expected. "I already know everything." He buried his face in his hands. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then Daniel whispered something that sounded more like a confession than an explanation. He said we could start over. My chest tightened. "What?" Daniel looked up slowly. His eyes were red. "Shane said if I kept investing, we'd both be set for life. He said the consulting company was about to explode." "You stole from our business for that?" Daniel nodded weakly. "He said it was temporary. He said the money would come back 10 times over." "And you believed him?" Daniel looked down again. "I thought—" His voice cracked. "I thought I could fix it before you ever found out." I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, I almost felt something close to pity. Then Lily's voice echoed in my memory. "Why don't you and Daddy laugh together anymore?" That question hardened something inside me again. "You realize Shane Kellerman is a con artist." Daniel looked up. "What?" I slid Tom's report across the table. The photos of other victims. The police records. The pattern of financial fraud. Daniel's face slowly collapsed as he read the pages. "No, that's not possible." "It is." I watched the truth settle over him like a slow-moving storm. Daniel's shoulders began to shake. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You should have." The room went quiet again. Finally, I spoke. "There's a lawyer involved." Daniel nodded slowly. "I figured. You have 2 options." I slid Patricia's written proposal across the table. "You cooperate. You give up your claim to Holbrook Plumbing. You accept supervised visits with Lily. And you repay every dollar you took." Daniel's voice was barely audible. "And if I don't? Then this becomes a criminal case." The silence that followed felt endless. Daniel stared at the paperwork. 16 years of marriage reduced to a few pages of legal terms. Finally, he signed.